warm Hawaiian sun beat down on the pristine white exterior of Aloha General Hospital, its rays reflecting off the gleaming windows and casting a golden glow across the lush, tropical landscaping. To the casual observer, it was a scene of tranquility and healing. But within those walls, a storm was brewing, one that would shake the very foundations of the hospital and force its staff to confront uncomfortable truths about prejudice, power, and the human capacity for both cruelty and redemption. Dr. Michael Hartley strode through the sliding glass doors of the emergency department, his crisp white coat billowing behind him like a cape. At 45, he was the picture of success. Tall, handsome, with salt and pepper hair that only seemed to enhance his air of authority. He'd been the head of the ER for 5 years, and in that time he'd cultivated a reputation for brilliance and efficiency. But he'd also become known for something else: his sharp tongue and unforgiving nature. As he approached the nurse's station, his steel blue eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. It was a typically busy morning in the ER, with the steady hum of monitors and the murmur of voices creating a familiar backdrop. But something caught his attention, or rather, someone. A new face stood out among the sea of familiar staff. She was a striking African-American woman, probably in her mid-30s, with close-cropped natural hair and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners as she smiled at a patient. Dr. Hartley's brow furrowed. He didn't recall approving any new hires. "Nurse," he barked, causing several heads to turn. "You there, with the green scrubs, come here." The woman looked up, her smile fading slightly as she met Dr. Hartley's intense gaze. She excused herself from the patient and walked over, her posture straight and confident. "Yes, doctor?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. Dr. Hartley looked her up and down, his expression a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "I don't recognize you. Are you new here?" The nurse nodded. "Yes, sir. It's my first day. I'm Amara Johnson." "Well, Nurse Johnson," Dr. Hartley said, emphasizing her title in a way that made it sound almost derogatory, "I don't recall approving any new hires. Who authorized your placement here?" Amara opened her mouth to respond, but Dr. Hartley cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Never mind. We'll sort that out later. For now, I need you to understand how things work in my ER. We run a tight ship here, and I expect nothing but the best from my staff. Is that clear?" "Of course, doctor," Amara replied, her voice still steady despite the tension building in her shoulders. "I assure you, I'm here to provide the highest quality of care to our patients." Dr. Hartley's eyes narrowed. There was something about this woman's composure that irked him. Most new nurses were intimidated by him, but she seemed unfazed. "We'll see about that," he muttered. Then louder, "All right, Nurse Johnson, let's see how you handle triage. Bay 3 needs an IV started. Think you can manage that without holding up the entire department?" The challenge in his voice was unmistakable, and a hush fell over the nearby staff. They'd seen Dr. Hartley in action before, and they knew this could get ugly fast. Amara, however, simply nodded. "Certainly, doctor. I'll take care of it right away." As she turned to head towards Bay 3, Dr. Hartley called after her, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, and Nurse Johnson? Try not to let your personal biases affect your care. We treat all patients equally here, regardless of their background. I hope that's not a problem for you." The implication hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Several of the other nurses exchanged shocked glances, while others quickly busied themselves with tasks, trying to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. Amara paused mid-step, her back stiffening. For a moment it seemed she might turn around and confront Dr. Hartley, but instead she took a deep breath and continued on her way, her head held high. As she disappeared behind the curtain of Bay 3, whispers erupted among the staff. Lisa Chen, a veteran nurse who had been with the hospital for over a decade, shook her head in disbelief. "That was completely uncalled for," she muttered to her colleague, Mark Canahelli. "Dr. Hartley's always been tough, but that was just cruel." Mark nodded, his dark eyes troubled. "Yeah, but what can we do? He's the boss. Nobody wants to cross him." Little did they know, the events set in motion that morning would soon force everyone in Aloha General to choose sides in a battle that would expose the hidden prejudices and power dynamics that had long simmered beneath the hospital's pristine surface. Inside Bay 3, Amara took a moment to collect herself. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the IV, but her mind was clear and focused. She'd faced prejudice before. It was an unfortunate reality of being a black woman in medicine, but she'd never encountered such blatant hostility from a superior on her first day. As she skillfully inserted the IV, her patient, an elderly Hawaiian man named Kekoa, watched her with concern. "You okay, sister?" he asked, his voice gravelly but kind. "That Howley doctor, he give you hard time, yeah?" Amara managed a small smile. "I'm fine, Mr. Kekoa. Don't you worry about me. How are you feeling? Any pain or discomfort?" As she tended to Kekoa, checking his vitals and ensuring his comfort, Amara's mind raced. She knew she should report Dr. Hartley's behavior, but she also knew the risks involved in challenging someone in his position. She'd worked too hard to get where she was to throw it all away on her first day. What Amara didn't know, what no one in the ER knew, was that her presence at Aloha General was no accident. She wasn't just a new nurse, she was Dr. Amara Johnson, MD, the newly appointed medical director of the entire hospital. Her first day as a nurse was actually part of an undercover operation designed to assess the hospital's operations from the ground up. The board of directors had been receiving troubling reports about staff morale and patient care, particularly in the ER. They brought Amara in not just for her impressive credentials, but for her unique approach to hospital management. She believed in experiencing every aspect of hospital operations firsthand before implementing changes. Now, as she finished up with Kekoa and prepared to face Dr. Hartley again, Amara realized that her undercover mission had already uncovered a problem far more serious than she'd anticipated. The question was, how deep did the roots of prejudice and abuse of power go at Aloha General? And more importantly, what would it take to root them out? As Amara emerged from Bay 3, she found Dr. Hartley waiting for her, arms crossed and a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The ER had grown unusually quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "Well, Nurse Johnson," Dr. Hartley drawled, "I hope you didn't have too much trouble in there. We can't afford to coddle our patients, you know. Efficiency is key in emergency medicine." Amara met his gaze steadily. "The IV has been placed successfully, Doctor. Mr. Kekoa is comfortable and his vitals are stable. I've also noted his medical history and current medications in the chart." Dr. Hartley's eyebrows rose slightly, as if he hadn't expected such a thorough report. He quickly masked his surprise with a scowl. "I see. Well, don't get too comfortable. We've got a busy day ahead and I'll be keeping a close eye on you. We can't afford any mistakes." The implication was clear, and Amara felt a surge of anger, but she pushed it down, reminding herself of her mission. She needed to observe, to understand the full scope of the problem before she could address it. "Of course, Doctor," she replied evenly. "I look forward to learning from your expertise." Dr. Hartley's eyes narrowed, as if trying to detect any sarcasm in her words. Finding none, he merely grunted and turned away, barking orders at other staff members as he moved through the ER. As the day wore on, Amara found herself thrust into the controlled chaos of the emergency room. Despite Dr. Hartley's constant scrutiny and thinly veiled jabs, she performed her duties with skill and compassion. Her fellow nurses, initially wary of the tension between her and Dr. Hartley, soon began to warm up to her. During a rare quiet moment, Lisa Chen approached Amara at the nurse's station. "Hey," she said softly, glancing around to make sure Dr. Hartley wasn't within earshot. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry about earlier. Dr. Hartley, he's not always like that. I mean, he's tough, but..." Amara gave her a small smile. "It's okay, Lisa. I appreciate you saying something. How long have you worked here?" "Almost 11 years now," Lisa replied, a hint of pride in her voice. "I've seen a lot of changes, but Dr. Hartley, he's been a constant, for better or worse." Amara nodded thoughtfully. "And has he always been so abrasive?" Lisa finished for her. She sighed. "He's gotten worse over the years, but he's brilliant, you know. He's saved so many lives. I think sometimes he forgets that we're all on the same team." Before Amara could respond, a commotion at the entrance caught their attention. Paramedics burst through the doors, wheeling in a gurney. On it lay a young woman, her skin ashen, her breathing labored. "What have we got?" Dr. Hartley's voice boomed as he strode towards the incoming patient. "Sarah Nakamura, 28 years old," one of the paramedics reported. "Found unconscious at home by her roommate, possible drug overdose. BP is 90/60, pulse is weak and thready. Dr. Hartley's demeanor shifted instantly, his focus laser-sharp as he began barking orders. Get her into Trauma 1. I need a full tox screen, CBC and chem panel stat. Nurse Johnson. Amara's head snapped up at the sound of her name. You're with me, Dr. Hartley commanded. Let's see if you can keep up. For the next hour, Amara worked alongside Dr. Hartley to stabilize Sarah. Despite his earlier hostility, she had to admit that he was indeed brilliant. His hands moved with precision, his mind seemingly 3 steps ahead at all times. And to her surprise, he worked seamlessly with her, anticipating her actions and trusting her to carry out complex tasks without hesitation. As Sarah's condition finally stabilized, Dr. Hartley stepped back, letting out a long breath. He turned to Amara, his expression unreadable. Not bad, Nurse Johnson, he said gruffly. You kept your cool in there. That's rare for a new nurse. Amara nodded, accepting the backhanded compliment for what it was. Thank you, Doctor. I'm glad we were able to help Sarah. For a moment, something almost like respect flickered in Dr. Hartley's eyes. But it was quickly replaced by his usual stern expression. Don't let it go to your head. We've still got a long shift ahead of us. As Dr. Hartley walked away, Amara felt a mix of emotions wash over her. On one hand, she was hauled by his earlier behavior and the casual racism he'd displayed. On the other, she just witnessed firsthand why he was considered one of the best emergency physicians in the state. The complexity of the situation was not lost on her. Little did she know, the events of the day were about to take an even more dramatic turn, one that would force everyone at Aloha General to confront their biases and re-examine their assumptions about power, race, and what it truly means to be a healer. As the sun began to set, painting the Hawaiian sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, the ER at Aloha General settled into the quieter rhythm of the evening shift. Amara found herself at the nurse's station, updating patient charts and reflecting on the day's events. The adrenaline rush from the trauma case had worn off, leaving her feeling drained but oddly satisfied. Despite Dr. Hartley's hostility, she'd proven herself capable in a crisis. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a distinguished-looking man in his early 60s. He wore a crisp suit that seemed at odds with the casual Hawaiian atmosphere, and his salt and pepper hair was neatly combed. As he approached the desk, Amara noticed several of the staff straightening up, their expressions a mixture of respect and apprehension. Good evening, the man said, his voice warm but authoritative. I'm looking for Dr. Michael Hartley. Is he available? Before Amara could respond, Dr. Hartley emerged from a nearby exam room, his face lighting up with recognition. Dr. Harrison, what brings you down to our humble ER? Dr. William Harrison, Chief of Medicine at Aloha General, smiled tightly. Michael, good to see you. I was hoping we could have a word in private. There's a matter of some importance we need to discuss. Dr. Hartley's brow furrowed slightly, but he nodded. Of course, we can use my office. As they turned to leave, Dr. Thanet Hartley's gaze fell on Amara. Nurse Johnson, hold down the fort while I'm gone. Try not to let the place fall apart. Amara bit back a retort, simply nodding in acknowledgement. As the two men walked away, she couldn't help but wonder what was going on. The tension in Dr. Harrison's posture suggested that this wasn't a casual visit. Her curiosity was shared by the rest of the staff. Lisa sidled up to her, speaking in a low voice. That's odd. Dr. Harrison rarely comes down here unless something big is happening. Mark joined them, his expression worried. You don't think it has anything to do with, what happened earlier? Amara shook her head. I doubt it. How would Dr. Harrison even know about that? But even as she said it, a small part of her wondered. Could word of Dr. Hartley's behavior have reached the hospital administration so quickly? Inside Dr. Hartley's office, the atmosphere was tense. Dr. Harrison sat across from Michael, his fingers steepled as he regarded the younger doctor with a mix of disappointment and frustration. Michael, he began, his tone grave, I've received some troubling reports about your behavior today. Specifically, your treatment of a new staff member. Dr. Hartley's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. I'm not sure what you're referring to, William. I hold all my staff to high standards. If someone can't handle that... Dr. Harrison held up a hand, cutting him off. This isn't about high standards, Michael. This is about respect, professionalism, and the core values of this hospital. We've had this conversation before, but this time, it's different. Dr. Hartley leaned back in his chair, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. Different how? I run the most efficient ER in the state. Our patient outcomes speak for themselves. So what if I'm a little tough on the new kids? It's for their own good. Dr. Harrison sighed heavily. Michael, do you know who Amara Johnson is? The question caught Dr. Hartley off guard. The new nurse? What about her? She's not just a new nurse, Dr. Harrison said slowly, watching Michael's reaction carefully. Dr. Amara Johnson is the new medical director of Aloha General. The board brought her in to assess our operations and implement necessary changes. She's been working undercover in various departments to get a first-hand look at how we function. The color drained from Dr. Hartley's face as the implications of this revelation sank in. But that's impossible. She's black? Dr. Harrison finished for him, his tone sharp. Female? Young? Tell me, Michael, which of these factors made it so hard for you to believe she could be in a position of authority? Dr. Hartley opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. The realization of what he'd done, how he'd treated his new boss, hit him like a physical blow. This isn't just about today, Dr. Harrison continued. We've had complaints about your behavior for years, but your skills as a physician always seem to outweigh the concerns. But this crosses a line, Michael. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss your future, Hoff. Dr. Hartley slumped in his chair, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. William, I didn't know. You have to believe me, I never meant to. Intent isn't the issue here, Michael, Dr. Harrison interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. The issue is the impact of your actions. Dr. Johnson was subjected to blatant discrimination and hostility on her first day. That's unacceptable, regardless of her position. Dr. Hartley ran a hand through his hair, his usual confidence shattered. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Harrison leaned forward, his expression grave. That's up to Dr. Johnson and the board. But I'll be honest with you, Michael. Your position here is in serious jeopardy. We can't ignore this kind of behavior, especially not from someone in a leadership role. As the two men continued their discussion, unaware of the growing tension outside the office, Amara found herself facing a crisis of her own. A young man had just been brought in, clutching his chest and struggling to breathe. His friend, panic evident in his voice, explained that they had been hiking when the symptoms started. I think it might be an allergic reaction, the friend said, his words tumbling out in a rush. He's allergic to bee stings, and I think he might have been stung, but I'm not sure, and he doesn't have his EpiPen, and Amara cut him off gently but firmly. We'll take care of him. Can you tell me his name? Kai, the friend replied. Kai Akana. Amara turned to Lisa, who was already prepping an exam room. Get me an EpiPen and start an IV. We need to be ready in case this escalates to anaphylaxis. As they worked to stabilize Kai, Amara felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. This was why she had become a doctor, to help people in their moments of greatest need. But as she called out orders and monitored Kai's vitals, she was acutely aware of the eyes of the other staff members on her. They were looking to her for leadership, even if they didn't know her true identity. Just as Kai's breathing began to ease, thanks to the swift administration of epinephrine, the door to Dr. Hartley's office burst open. Dr. Hartley emerged, his face ashen, followed closely by Dr. Harrison. They took in the scene before them, Amara confidently leading the team, the patient stabilizing, the staff working in perfect sync. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Dr. Hartley approached the exam room. Nurse Johnson, he said, his voice strained. What's the situation here? Amara met his gaze steadily. Patient is Kai Akana, 25 years old, presenting with symptoms of anaphylaxis, likely due to a bee sting. We've administered epinephrine and started an IV. His condition is stabilizing, but we'll need to monitor him closely for the next few hours. Dr. Hartley nodded, seemingly at a loss for words. He looked from Amara to the patient, then back to Amara. The realization of her competence, so at odds with his earlier assumptions, was written clearly on his face. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Excellent work, Dr. Johnson. I think it's time we dropped the pretense, don't you? A collective gasp went up from the staff. Amara nodded, straightening up and addressing the room at large. For those of you who haven't been informed, my name is Dr. Amara Johnson. I'm the new medical director of Aloha General. I've been working undercover to assess our operations and identify areas for improvement. The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa's mouth hung open in shock, while Mark looked like he might faint. Dr. Hartley, for his part, seemed to shrink into himself, the full weight of his earlier behavior crashing down on him. Amara continued, her voice calm but authoritative. I want to thank all of you for your hard work today. You've shown incredible skill and dedication under challenging circumstances. However, it's clear that we have some serious issues to address. She turned to Dr. Hartley, her expression unreadable. Dr. Hartley, I believe we need to have a conversation about the events of today. But first, let's make sure Mr. Akana is stable and comfortable. As the staff bustled around, following Amara's instructions and trying to process the revelation, Dr. Harrison pulled her aside. I'm sorry we couldn't tell you about Dr. Hartley's tendencies before you started. We hope that by observing firsthand, you'd be able to help us address the systemic issues at play here. Amara nodded, her expression thoughtful. I understand. And while I don't condone the method, I have to admit it was illuminating. We have a lot of work to do here, Dr. Harrison. Not just with Dr. Hartley, but with the entire culture of the hospital. As the evening wore on, the ER buzzed with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Word of Amara's true identity spread quickly, and staff members from other departments began finding excuses to pass by the ER, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who had so thoroughly upended the status quo. For Amara, the revelation brought a mixture of relief and new challenges. She was glad to be able to drop the pretense, but she knew that the real work was only beginning. As she made her way through the ER, checking on patients and reassuring staff members, she couldn't help but feel the weight of expectation on her shoulders. Later that night, after ensuring that Kai was stable and on his way to a full recovery, Amara found herself face to face with Dr. Hartley once again. They stood in his office, soon to be her office, the tension between them palpable. Dr. Johnson, Dr. Hartley began, his voice hoarse. I want to apologize for my behavior earlier. It was unprofessional and wrong. I let my preconceptions cloud my judgment, and I treated you in a way that no one should be treated, regardless of their position. Amara regarded him silently for a moment, weighing her response. Dr. Hartley, I appreciate your apology, but I think we both know that this goes beyond just one day or one interaction. The attitudes you displayed are symptomatic of deeper issues within this hospital and within the medical community at large. Dr. Hartley nodded, unable to meet her gaze. I understand, and I'm prepared to face the consequences of my actions. Amara leaned against the desk, her expression softening slightly. The easy thing would be to fire you, Dr. Hartley, to make an example of you and declare the problem solved, but I don't believe that would address the root of the issue. Dr. Hartley looked up, surprise evident on his face. What are you saying? I'm saying that change, real, lasting change, requires more than just punitive action. It requires education, self-reflection, and a genuine commitment to doing better. Amara paused, considering her next words carefully. I'm willing to give you that chance, Dr. Hartley, but it won't be easy. You'll need to undergo intensive bias training, participate in community outreach programs, and work closely with our diversity and inclusion team. Dr. Hartley nodded slowly, a mix of relief and trepidation on his face. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I've spent my entire career trying to be the best doctor I could be, but I realize now that I've been falling short in some very important ways. Amara stood up, her posture straight and confident. Good, because starting tomorrow, we're going to be making some big changes around here, and I'm going to need all hands on deck, including yours. As she turned to leave, Dr. Hartley called out, Dr. Johnson? She paused at the door, looking back at him. Thank you, he said softly, for giving me this chance. I won't let you down. Amara nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. See that you don't, Dr. Hartley, because this isn't just about you or me. It's about every patient who walks through those doors, every staff member who dedicates their life to healing, and every person in this community who deserves equitable, compassionate care. We have a lot of work to do, and it starts now. As she walked out of the office and back into the bustling ER, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges ahead were daunting, but she was ready to face them head-on. Because sometimes, it takes a shock to the system to bring about real change. And at Aloha General, that change was long overdue. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the Hawaiian sun casting a golden glow over the hospital grounds. But inside Aloha General, the atmosphere was charged with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Word of the previous day's events had spread like wildfire, and everyone, from the janitorial staff to the board of directors, was buzzing with speculation about what Dr. Amara Johnson's leadership would mean for the future of the hospital. Amara arrived early, her mind already racing with plans and strategies. As she walked through the main entrance, she couldn't help but notice the way heads turned and conversations hushed. She smiled and nodded at those she passed, projecting an air of calm confidence, even as her stomach churned with nerves. Her first stop was a hastily arranged meeting with the hospital's department heads. As she entered the conference room, she was met with a sea of curious and somewhat wary faces. Dr. Harrison was there, along with the chiefs of surgery, pediatrics, oncology, and several other key departments. Notably absent was Dr. Hartley, who had been asked to take a few days of administrative leave while the situation was sorted out. "Good morning, everyone," Amara began, her voice steady and clear. "I know my arrival and the events of yesterday have caused quite a stir. I want to start by thanking you all for your dedication to this hospital and its patients. The work you do here is invaluable, and I'm honored to be joining your team." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "However, I think we all know that there are issues that need to be addressed. What happened with Dr. Hartley is not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of deeper problems within our institution." A murmur ran through the room, and Amara saw several of the department heads shift uncomfortably in their seats. She pressed on, her tone firm but not unkind. "Over the next few weeks, we'll be conducting a thorough review of our policies and procedures, with a particular focus on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll be meeting with each of you individually to discuss your departments and any concerns you may have. But I want to make one thing clear from the outset. Change is coming to Aloha General, and I expect everyone in this room to be part of that change." Dr. Sarah Chen, the chief of pediatrics, raised her hand tentatively. "Dr. Johnson, while I think we all agree that changes are needed, some of us are concerned about how this might affect our day-to-day operations. We're already stretched thin in many departments." Amara nodded, appreciating the direct approach. "That's a valid concern, Dr. Chen. I assure you, my goal is not to disrupt the excellent care you provide. Rather, it's to enhance it by creating a more inclusive and equitable environment for both our staff and our patients. This may require some short-term adjustments, but I believe the long-term benefits will be significant." As the meeting continued, Amara outlined her initial plans: mandatory bias training for all staff, the formation of a diversity and inclusion task force, and a review of hiring and promotion practices. She also announced her intention to implement a community outreach program to better serve Honolulu's diverse population. By the time the meeting adjourned, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. While some still looked skeptical, many of the department heads seemed energized by Amara's vision and her clear commitment to positive change. As the day progressed, Amara found herself pulled in a dozen different directions. She met with HR to discuss the situation with Dr. Hartley, spoke with the hospital's legal team about potential liability issues, and even gave a brief interview to a local news station that had gotten wind of the previous day's events. But despite the chaos, she made sure to spend time in the ER, wanting to reconnect with the staff she had worked alongside during her undercover stint. As she approached the nurses' station, she saw Lisa and Mark huddled together, deep in conversation. They looked up as she approached, their expressions a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "Dr. Johnson," Lisa began, stumbling slightly over the title, "we just wanted to say, well, we're sorry if we did or said anything inappropriate yesterday. We had no idea." Amara held up a hand, smiling warmly. "Please, there's no need to apologize. You were all incredibly welcoming and professional. In fact, working with you yesterday only reinforced my belief in the potential of this hospital and its staff." Mark's face broke into a relieved grin. "So does this mean you'll still let us call you Amara? Or should we stick with Dr. Johnson now?" Amara laughed, the sound breaking some of the tension that had been building throughout the day. "Amara is fine when we're not in front of patients. And I hope you'll both feel comfortable coming to me with any concerns or ideas you might have. My door is always open." As they chatted, Amara couldn't help but notice the way other staff members were watching their interaction. She realized that these small moments, showing that she was approachable, that she valued the input of all staff members, regardless of their position, were just as important as the big policy changes she was planning. Later that afternoon, as Amara was reviewing patient files in her new office, there was a knock at the door. She looked up to see Dr. Hartley standing there, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Dr. Hartley," she said, gesturing for him to enter. "I wasn't expecting to see you today." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I know, and I apologize for the intrusion. I couldn't sleep last night. I kept replaying yesterday's events in my mind, and I realized that a simple apology isn't enough. I need to do more." Amara leaned back in her chair, studying him closely. "I'm listening." Dr. Hartley took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching, and I've come to realize that my behavior yesterday wasn't just a one-time lapse in judgment. It was the result of years of unchecked biases and privileges that I've never fully acknowledged." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I've always prided myself on being a good doctor, on saving lives. But I see now that I've been failing in one of the most fundamental aspects of medicine, treating all patients and colleagues with equal respect and dignity." Amara nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I want to be part of the solution, Dr. Johnson. I want to use my position and influence to help bring about the changes you're proposing. I know I have a lot to learn, and I'm prepared to put in the work. If you'll have me, I'd like to volunteer to lead the bias training initiative for the ER staff." Amara raised an eyebrow, surprised by the offer. "That's a significant commitment, Dr. Hartley. Are you sure you're ready for that level of responsibility and scrutiny?" He nodded, his expression resolute. "I am. I think it's important for the staff to see that even those of us in leadership positions are willing to acknowledge our mistakes and work to improve. And frankly, I think I have more to learn from this process than anyone." Amara considered his words carefully. She knew that allowing Dr. Hartley to take on such a visible role in the hospital's transformation would be controversial. Some would see it as letting him off too easily, while others might question the sincerity of his change of heart. But as she looked at the man before her, a brilliant doctor humbled by his own failings, genuinely seeking to make amends, she saw an opportunity. An opportunity not just for personal growth, but for institutional change. "All right, Dr. Hartley," she said finally. "I'll give you this chance, but understand that this won't be easy. You'll be under intense scrutiny, and you'll need to be prepared to face some hard truths about yourself and your past behavior." Dr. Hartley nodded solemnly. "I understand, and I'm ready." As he turned to leave, Amara called out, "Dr. Hartley?" He paused at the door, looking back at her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being willing to do the hard work. It's a good first step." As the door closed behind him, Amara leaned back in her chair, a mix of emotions washing over her. The road ahead would be challenging, fraught with obstacles and resistance. But for the first time since she'd taken on this role, she felt a glimmer of real hope. Because change, real change, doesn't come from the top down alone. It requires buy-in and effort from every level of an organization. And Dr. Hartley's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and work towards improvement could be the catalyst needed to spark a genuine transformation at Aloha General. As the weeks passed, Amara found herself navigating a complex web of challenges and opportunities. The implementation of her new initiatives was met with a mixture of enthusiasm and resistance. Some staff members embraced the changes wholeheartedly, eager to be part of a more inclusive and equitable workplace. Others grumbled about political correctness gone too far and resisted attending the mandatory bias training sessions. One particularly tense moment came during a hospital-wide staff meeting where Amara was presenting the preliminary findings of the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. as she outlined the disparities they'd uncovered in patient care and staff advancement opportunities. A voice from the back of the room cut through the murmur of conversation. "This is ridiculous." The speaker was Dr. Richard Yamamoto, a senior surgeon known for his skill in the operating room and his prickly personality outside of it. "We're here to practice medicine, not engage in social experiments. Are you suggesting we should prioritize diversity over competence?" A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to Amara, waiting to see how she would respond to this direct challenge. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to remain calm and professional. "Dr. Yamamoto," she began, her voice steady, "I appreciate your concern, but I want to be clear. This is not an either-or situation. We are not sacrificing competence for diversity. In fact, study after study has shown that diverse teams lead to better outcomes, more innovation, and improved patient care." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "What we are doing is acknowledging that our current systems may be overlooking or undervaluing talented individuals due to unconscious biases. By addressing these biases and creating more inclusive practices, we're actually expanding our pool of competent professionals, not limiting it." Dr. Yamamoto opened his mouth to argue further, but to everyone's surprise, it was Dr. Hartley who spoke up next. "If I may," he said, standing up and addressing both Amara and Dr. Yamamoto. "A few months ago, I might have agreed with you, Richard. I thought I was just holding everyone to high standards, but I've come to realize that what I saw as high standards were often just my own biases in disguise." He turned to face the room at large. "I judged Dr. Johnson based on her race and gender, assuming she couldn't possibly be as competent as me. And I was wrong. Dead wrong. She's not only an incredibly skilled physician, but she's also pushing us to be better, not just as doctors, but as human beings." The room fell silent as Dr. Hartley's words sank in. Even Dr. Yamamoto seemed taken aback by this unexpected support. Amara nodded gratefully to Dr. Hartley before addressing the room once more. "Change is never easy," she said softly, "but it's necessary. We owe it to our patients, to our community, and to ourselves to create an environment where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and provide the best possible care." As the meeting adjourned, Amara could feel a shift in the atmosphere. While not everyone was fully on board, Dr. Hartley's testimony had made an impact. It was a small victory, but an important one. Over the next few months, Aloha General began to transform. The bias training sessions, initially met with skepticism, started to yield results. Staff members reported feeling more aware of their unconscious biases and more equipped to address them. The Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, made up of representatives from various departments and levels of the hospital hierarchy, began implementing changes to hiring and promotion practices. One of the most significant changes came in the form of a new community outreach program. Amara had noticed that certain communities in Honolulu, particularly those with large immigrant populations, were underserved by the hospital. She spearheaded an initiative to set up mobile clinics in these neighborhoods, staffed by multilingual healthcare workers who could provide culturally sensitive care. Dr. Hartley, true to his word, threw himself into the work of change. He not only led the bias training for the ER staff, but also volunteered to work shifts at the mobile clinics. Seeing one of the hospital's top doctors out in the community, learning to communicate across cultural and linguistic barriers, had a powerful effect on both the staff and the patients. But perhaps the most profound change was in the day-to-day interactions within the hospital. Nurses reported feeling more empowered to speak up when they noticed potential issues with patient care. Doctors from diverse backgrounds found themselves being considered for leadership positions that might have previously seemed out of reach. One day, about 6 months after Amara had first arrived at Aloha General, she found herself back in the ER. This time, not undercover, but as part of her regular rounds. As she chatted with Lisa and Mark at the nurses' station, a commotion at the entrance caught their attention. Paramedics rushed in with a patient on a gurney, a young Hawaiian man, barely conscious and clearly in distress. Dr. Hartley, who was on shift, immediately took charge of the situation. "What have we got?" he asked, his voice calm but urgent. "Keon Maho, 22 years old," one of the paramedics reported, "found unresponsive at a luau. Friends report he has a shellfish allergy, but accidentally ate some shrimp. He's in anaphylactic shock. Dr. Hartley nodded, already moving to assess the patient. All right, let's move him to Trauma 1. I need epinephrine stat. Nurse Chen, start an IV. Dr. Johnson, would you assist? Amara stepped forward without hesitation, falling into sync with Dr. Hartley as they worked to stabilize Keon. The next few minutes were a blur of activity, administering medications, monitoring vitals, and working to ensure Keon's airways remained open. As they worked, Amara couldn't help but notice the difference in Dr. Hartley's demeanor. He was still focused and decisive, but there was a new level of collaboration in his approach. He listened to the nurse's input, explained his decisions clearly to the younger residents, and treated everyone on the team with respect. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was really only about 20 minutes, Keon's condition stabilized. His breathing eased, his color improved, and he began to regain consciousness. As they stepped back from the bed, allowing the nurses to continue monitoring Keon, Dr. Hartley turned to Amara with a tired but genuine smile. "Nice work, Dr. Johnson," he said. "I'm glad you were here." Amara returned the smile. "Thank you, Dr. Hartley. You handled that situation expertly." As they exited the trauma room, Amara noticed a group of staff members watching them with a mixture of awe and approval. She realized that this moment, seeing her and Dr. Hartley working together as equals, saving a life, was powerful in ways that went beyond just medical care. Later that evening, as Amara was preparing to head home, she paused in the lobby, taking in the bustle of the hospital around her. She saw Dr. Chen from Pediatrics chatting animatedly with one of the new residents, a young woman of Filipino descent. She noticed Mark patiently explaining discharge instructions to an elderly patient in fluent Japanese. And she watched as Dr. Hartley engaged in a friendly conversation with one of the janitorial staff, something she never would have imagined seeing 6 months ago. As she pushed through the doors into the warm Hawaiian night, Amara felt a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over her. Aloha General wasn't perfect. There was still much work to be done. But it was progress. Real, tangible progress. She thought back to that first day, to the shock and anger she had felt at Dr. Hartley's treatment of her. It would have been easy to let that moment define her time at Aloha General, to approach her role with bitterness or a desire for revenge. But instead, she had chosen to see it as an opportunity to create lasting change. As she walked to her car, the scent of plumeria blossoms filling the air, Amara smiled to herself. Because sometimes the most profound transformations come from the most unexpected places. And at Aloha General, a hospital in the heart of paradise, a revolution in compassion and equality was well underway. The story of Dr. Amara Johnson and Aloha General didn't end there, of course. It was just the beginning of a longer journey. A journey towards a healthcare system that truly lived up to the ideals of healing, compassion, and equality for all. But on that warm Hawaiian night, as the stars twinkled overhead and the ocean waves lapped gently at the shore, it felt like anything was possible. And in the end, isn't that what the spirit of Aloha is all about? The recognition of the divine in every person, the commitment to treating all with respect and love, and the belief that by working together, we can create a better world for everyone. As Amara drove home, the lights of Honolulu twinkling in her rearview mirror, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth and change. But she was ready, and more importantly, Aloha General was ready too.